In the late 1930s, the American Navy was becoming incredibly worried about the massive swarms of Japanese heavy cruisers. This was due to Japan leaving the Washington Naval Treaty, meaning Japanese cruisers were no longer limited to being 10,000 tons in displacement and having a maximum of 8-inch guns. This meant compared to American heavy cruisers, the Japanese did have quite a large advantage over them. And because the Pacific is such a wide open ocean, it was widely believed that cruisers would be the main combat force in that theatre of operations. And as the several battles off Guadalcanal showed, it was mainly light and heavy cruisers as well as a few destroyers fighting, at least until battleships South Dakota and Washington came to the rescue. Anyway, this swarm of Japanese cruisers led the American government to design their own cruiser killer, similar in concept to the British battle cruiser, but the Alaska was not a battle cruiser, and even the Americans classed it as a large cruiser. It basically used an unlengthened heavy cruiser hull, along with heavy cruiser armour, which isn't that good, but it did use 12-inch guns, which granted, in the 1900s were battleship grade weaponry, but in 1941, that was far from the truth. Regardless of that, in War Thunder, the USS Alaska is classed as a rank 5 battle rating 7.0 battle cruiser, obviously in the American tech tree. To unlock it, it'll set you back 380,000 research points before a purchase cost of 990,000 silver lions. This is a tech tree vehicle and will come fully stock, and you will have to place it in your lineup for the cost of 280,000 silver lions. And for the expert and ace qualifications, which are important in naval, it's 990,000 silver lions for the expert qualification and 2,000 golden eagles for the ace qualification. So with its high speed and big guns, is the USS Alaska going to make a splash? Haha. Or with its weak armour and relatively big profile, is it dead on arrival? Well, if you'd like to know the answer to that question, lads, stick around for the rest of the video. Alright lads, welcome back. Starting as always with the crew. This is basically the health bar of the ship. Doesn't quite work that simply, but it gives you a good understanding of how survivable this ship is. And with a stock crew, you will have 1,149 crew members available for repair. This number is basically the non-essential crewmen who can run around doing repairs and basically stuff like that. If you've ever played naval and had the message there are no longer enough crew members available for repair, it basically means you've depleted this number of crew. But anyway, with an ace qualification, 1,149 rises up to 1,386. This is why crew skills in naval are so important. It basically gives you more health. Again, not quite that simple, but basically that's what it does. We then move on to the armour, and it isn't too amazing here to be honest. Although this ship was built in 1941, it kind of has the same armour as a battlecruiser from 1910. The main armoured belt of the ship running along the waterline is 228mm thick, basically 9 inches of armour. While this certainly is workable if you are angling, if you're going full broadside against anyone, then even heavy cruisers will be able to penetrate your armour. If we then move up to the barbette, which is the armoured column underneath the turret, our armour does increase, up to 304mm thick, basically 12 inches of armour. If we then move up to the turret itself, then our armour does increase again, up to 325mm of armour, basically 13 inches. While 13 inches of steel does sound like a lot of protection, against a battleship shooting back at you at top tier War Thunder naval battles, it isn't really that impressive. And finally for our armour section, we'll take a look at our 5-inch gun turrets. In here, they only have 25.4mm of armour. This is basically nothing, only being 1 inch thick, and is basically just anti-frag I guess. We then come on to the firepower, and the USS Alaska is armed with 9 12-inch 50 Mark 8 cannons. The ship has 3 turrets, each with 3 guns. Each gun has a total ammunition capacity of 160 shells, and with a stock crew, you will be able to reload every 26 seconds. However, with an ace crew, again, crew skills are very important in naval, your reload speed will drop down to 20 seconds. So with an ace crew, you have a fire rate of 3 shells per minute. This is much better than most battleships at top tier, but due to your rather weak armour, I wouldn't say this thing can go toe to toe with some of the more heavily armoured battleships. However, against large cruisers, heavy cruisers, destroyers, it absolutely minces them to pieces. This is mainly due to your ammunition. Starting with your first shell, and probably the round that you should use most of all. For some reason currently in War Thunder, high explosive rounds do massive amounts of damage, even towards heavily armoured ships. So our first round is a 12-inch Mark 17 HC. This shell only contains 35.3 kilos of TNT filler, but you are firing 9 of them at a time. And with a reload rate of 20 seconds, you can just kind of spam these. These rounds are especially good against some of the Japanese heavy cruisers, which I guess does fulfill what they were designed for. The Japanese heavy cruisers are very lightly armoured but have a lot of firepower, but with these high explosive shells you can pretty much just rip through them. For more heavily armoured opponents, even though the high shells are pretty still effective against them, we do also have the 12-inch Mark 18 armour piercing rounds. These contain much less explosive filler, only 7.7 kilos, but they do penetrate 621mm of armour. However, even at a range of 15,000 meters or 15 kilometers, they can penetrate 374mm of armour. You'll notice that even at a range of 15 kilometers, these guns can penetrate even the thickest part of the Alaska's own armour. And if a 12-inch gun can penetrate your armour from 15 kilometers, then the 15-inch gun battleships will certainly be able to wreck your shit. Anyway though, the 12-inch guns aren't the only weapons on this ship. We also have the 5-inch Mark 38 guns. The guns that won the naval war in the Pacific for the Americans. These guns are quite short and stubby, which limits their effectiveness in naval warfare, but makes them perfect for anti-aircraft operations. They contain 360 rounds per gun, and have a first stage ammunition rack of 40 rounds. They can also elevate to 85 degrees, allowing you to shoot planes directly over your head. Our crew skills are also important here again. With a stock crew we can reload every 3.6 seconds, and with an ace crew, that again drops down to 2.8 seconds. We then also have a plethora of 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Starting with the 40mm Bofors, these are L60 Mark II guns, giving them pretty good muzzle velocity. Each gun has 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and they can elevate their guns up to a maximum of 90 degrees. Again, allowing you to target planes directly over your head. In the later years of World War II, exactly around the time that the USS Alaska was sailing, these 40mm guns did have proximity fused warheads, but unfortunately, Gaijin decided not to add these features, even though they were 100% used. This does reduce the effectiveness of the 40mm Bofors, but you've got so many of these guns that it really doesn't matter in my opinion. And finally, we have the 20mm-70 Oerlikons. At the start of the war in the Pacific, these Oerlikons were the go-to anti-aircraft weapon for the American Navy. However, as the planes got bigger and bigger, they rapidly became quite redundant, as they can no longer reach out and hit Japanese planes before they made their attack run. This is why American ships of all classes moved away from the 20mm and started replacing them with 40mm mounts instead, as they did have the range to hit them. Regardless though, each 20mm has 1,800 rounds of ammunition, and again has a pretty decent vertical guidance characteristic of 65 degrees. Not quite as good as the 5-inch and 45mm, but still good enough for our intended use. And that covers it for our firepower, as well as our general overview. But now, let's get into the important questions. Does the USS Alaska have a good lineup at top tier? Well, I'm sorry to say it, but the answer is no really. Unlike other nations in War Thunder, you don't really have a powerful battleship. Yes, the Arizona has a lot of firepower, but its reload speed is awful, it's incredibly slow, and its rounds don't really do much damage. Compared to the Kronstadt, the Marlborough, or even the Scharnhorst, the USS Alaska just doesn't have a great lineup of very hard-hitting battleships. And as I've said, the USS Alaska isn't a battleship, it's not got the armour for it. It can't really tank rounds against other battleships. So because of this, I'd give it a 2 out of 5. Is the Alaska new player friendly? Again, not really. It's a battle cruiser that relies more on its speed and its firepower than it does on its armour, so it isn't very forgiving. If you put yourself in a bad position and get yourself shot up by a lot of the enemy team, then you're going to die incredibly quickly. While you do have quite a lot of crew on this ship, giving you pretty decent survivability when you get injured, there's no armour there to stop you actually getting damaged, which is the main difference between a battle cruiser and a battleship in War Thunder at the minute. Because of this, I'd again give it a 2 out of 5. Is it good value for money or value for grinding? Well, if you're an American, I'd say it is, because it's a nice ship, but the American tech tree hasn't really been that good in War Thunder lately. at least in terms of naval. The American heavy cruisers have got nerfed significantly because the 8-inch gun spread is horrific for some reason, even though it's completely unrealistic. While the American naval tree isn't as bad as the Italians, because that would be literally impossible, it's still not amazing value for money. I don't really see why you'd grant a top tier naval, other than you're American and you like playing it. I know I've granted it, but I like naval stuff. I'd give it a 3 out of 5. Is the USS Alaska in the meta at the minute? Well, yes and no. It's not good against battleships, but it is good against cruisers. So I'd give it a 3 out of 5 again. And finally, is it cool? Well, I'd say it's the coolest ship we currently have in War Thunder. It's got great lines, it's got good firepower against heavy cruisers, it's got a shitload of 40mm, and if a plane does come over your head, all those guns firing at it does light up the sky. So I'd give it a 4 out of 5 for coolness. Anyway lads, the USS Alaska is a nice addition to War Thunder. However, it isn't the best battleship or best big ship currently in the game. I'd say the larger battleships still take that role, as they are far more powerful. Anyway lads, if you enjoyed the video, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing, and be sure to leave a comment down below, and let me know what vehicles you guys would like to see reviewed next. I'd also like to say a big thank you to my channel members, Wolfie Fly, Joseph Metcalf, Tomster013, Just Someone, Dr. Bob, Deboa LX, Tans, William Tessier, and Lola Alfonsi. Thank you very much for becoming members lads, and I'll see you in the next review.